So this was built by the Maccabees. Have you ever heard of the Maccabees?
Yes.
Who were they?
They were Jewish
Rebels. What happened is Alexander the Great and his family conquered the whole area, all the way down through Egypt and over to Persia and everything. But right after Alexander died, the empire fell apart and was broken into 3 pieces. And one of the pieces, it just kept, this was right on the edge of one of the pieces. And so it kept changing hands. The Seleucids in Syria would get it, and then the Ptolemies in Egypt would get it, and they would go back and forth. Okay? And both of those kingdoms gradually became weaker. Okay? And they also started imposing Greek culture on the locals. And the Israeli locals, the Jews really hated that. And so at one point, they rebelled, and the leaders of the rebellion was the family of the Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus and Simon and a whole bunch of others. And their children became the kings of this area. And because the 2 empires were weak, this middle border area, they just wasn't under control, so it was easy for them to expand. And so they expanded into Jordan and all of Israel. And they built a whole bunch of fortresses in very strategic places. And so believe it or not, this is a very strategic place. Why?
It's the high point.
Really high.
Yeah, but it's on top of a dry hill. Who would even want it? I mean,
You can see over the Dead Sea.
yeah, there's very few places for trade to come. If you go out into the Jordanian desert 2 miles, it's not passable. There's no water at all. This is the fertile area. It doesn't look fertile to you, but it is very fertile. It rains here in the winter, and these mountains are covered with green. You won't believe it. In February, it's covered with green and red poppies, and it's incredibly beautiful. Okay, and all the sheep that go into Amman during the winter come out here and graze. And all the agriculture you saw around there that we were driving through, that's the stuff that flourishes in the winter, because that's when it rains. And so this would have been easy to supply, plus easy to control the trade routes, because you can either come along the King's Highway, which is the road we were on. That's the one highway that's in, or you can come along the Dead Sea. No other place. And so this fortress can overlook the Dead Sea route, and any caravan that comes along, you tax them, right? And so that's how you get rich off international trade. Also, they wanted to protect themselves from the locals. The longer the kingdoms went on, like once Herod took over about 100 something BC, the rulers were hated by the locals. And so these were all fortresses for armies. That's all they were. But he made them into palaces, so he could retreat here whenever there was problems. And he did. His family, and so it was very luxurious. And he had a lot of these places would be storehouses, and they'd be filled with things of wine and olive oil and grain and stuff. And they'd cart water up with donkeys and fill cisterns like this with water, so they could just stay as long as the siege lasted. And so Herod, there's all kinds of stories. You read Josephus, Herod was always escaping to these when there was little problems in the city, and he was afraid that the populace might rise up. He'd just take his family and flee to one of these, and there's about a day's journey between each one. So there's one right by Bethlehem, Masada is right down there on the other side, and then this one on this side, and there's a couple of others, okay? And so then his family just inherited it. So the Herod that killed John the Baptist was not Herod the Great, it was his grandson. But he controlled this area, and he was here, with his court, living with his brother's wife that John the Baptist had condemned. And so he brought him and put him in prison, but didn't dare kill him because the populace thought he was a prophet. But then when Salome danced for him, he couldn't. I mean, it says he'd made an oath, and because of the oath, he had to bring his head. So, and the last part is Herod's family kind of disintegrated, and the Romans just named rulers over all this area. But then at a certain period, about 70 AD, the Jews rebelled, and a lot of the Jewish rebels, the Romans quickly reconquered all the city areas, but they seized all these fortresses. Okay, so Masada and here were filled with Jewish rebels, and there was big walls around it, and they could really easily defend themselves, and they had all Herod's stores that hadn't been used up, so they could stay for years. So when both Masada and here, the Romans built a siege ramp, and they brought huge siege machines and knocked down the walls and killed everybody. And if you go down the first corner down there, look over the thing, you can see the remains of the siege ramp. It's just a big pile of rubble that would have come right up to the walls. So.
When did the Romans come, and at what point after the two kingdoms started getting weak and the Maccabees took control, at what point did the Romans come back?
Okay. Herod was married to the Maccabees, and so what happened is the Maccabees themselves became weak, and between 100 BC and the time of Christ, Herod, who was an Edomite from southern Israel, married into the Maccabee family, and so he considered himself an heir of the Maccabees, and he aligned himself with Rome, and so he was ruling for Rome, and he sent taxes to Rome. And it was when his family fell apart that the Romans just got tired of it and just named governors. But the Romans were actually, I mean, Herod was ruling when they had to pay taxes to Rome. So, so Rome was here when Herod was here, yeah. But if you walk around, you'll see there was a lot of different levels. Most of this stuff is, we're walking on tops of buildings because they haven't excavated it. But if you go down there, you can see the arch. Okay, so you'd have to go all the way down to the floor of where that arch would be to find the original level of where the palace was. And this wouldn't have been they probably flattened it off somewhat, but there would have been things on different levels. So that's probably lower, and then this would have been higher up here, just because that's the way the mountain was. So, anyway, that's my spiel.